Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of the Falcoholic Live, episode 299. This close to the 300th episode. We're going to have something special for you guys next week. I don't know exactly what that is yet. I'm teasing something before I've planned it, but there'll be something fun for sure. Adnan, of course, is off vacationing to God knows where, so he's out of the loop. So we'll have to do it without Adnan. But no matter, we have Dave Choate, the Falcoholic himself, here with us tonight. We'll be joined by Tre'Shon Diaz in just a little bit, but until then, Dave, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Great. Good to be back and more than ready for this season. Could not be more ready.
Yeah, and speaking of Tre'Shon Diaz, there he is. He is Tre'Shon at Tre'Shon on the Twitters, one of our newest contributors over at Falcoholic.com. Tre'Shon, welcome in. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Like Dave, I'm very ready for the season to start. I feel like the last week before the regular season just is such a dead period, and man, I'm just ready for some football to start being played.
That's why I love DragonCon. Shout out to all the fans that said hi at DragonCon in Atlanta, because it's like the perfect time where it's like I'm like gonna just be staring at X all day, like trying to come up with football takes if I'm home. But if I'm not home, I'm at this convention, then it just is distracting. Then I come back, ready to go for week one, which, in case you guys didn't know, it is week one. We are getting into real football season. We got the first official injury report today. I know some people had minor heart attacks when Kyle's name popped up on there, but we'll talk about that. Probably nothing to be worried about. And we'll get into some other stuff, mostly, of course, talking about our week one matchup with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Before we do, real quick, I want to bring you guys a word from our sponsor, BetOnline. And folks, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline's got every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. If you're, we're past the preseason degenerate period. This is now like official NFL season betting, so I'll be slightly less judgmental if you place bets on regular season games. But either way, it's not my business. You can do whatever you want over at BetOnline. And they've also got a new $200,000 mega contest. They've got a pick 5 games against the spread every week. Where the winner has a chance at a share of $200,000. Also got a survivor pool going on, which you haven't got in on that yet. That's another winner-take-all sort of game if you want to get in on that action. And when the game's over, BetOnline has a new online casino. They've got online blackjack, poker, 150 different types of slots games. So what are you waiting for, folks? Head to that website today, BetOnline, to get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. Well, let's get let's get it out of the way. Let's talk about the injury report, right? 2 guys on that list. Kyle Pitts, the tight end, limited with a hamstring injury, which I know gave people a heart attack. And we've also got linebacker Nate Landman, who's still working on his existing quad injury. Wasn't really any concern from the team, but given everything that's happened with Kyle Pitts over the last few years, a lot of panic set in. Tre'Shon, do you have any level of concern at this point? They've basically gone out of their way to tell us, we're just sending you this so we don't get fined, is kind of the message I was getting. But anything in particular that are you concerned at all about this recent development with Kyle Pitts?
No concerns. I don't want to say I felt good when I saw him there, but it was definitely a different approach to the Kyle Pitts injury management that we've seen in years past. And kind of as to your point, this is so we don't get fined. This is also so nobody gets yelled at, or 8 weeks down the road, it's like, oh, by the way, Kyle's kind of been dealing with like a hammy thing since the beginning of the season. We didn't really tell you guys about it, but it's really been no big deal. So the fact that they've got ahead of it, everybody's talking very confidently about Pitts and what he's been able to do in practice really leads me, no reason to be concerned.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Kyle Pitts did like my tweet saying, there doesn't seem to be any concern about Kyle Pitts. So he doesn't think there's any concern, clearly. So that's always nice to hear. Dave, do you have any concerns at all about Kyle Pitts at this stage? And maybe Nate Landman's the other one I guess we could talk about. There doesn't seem to be any concern, I guess, publicly about his availability. But are you concerned at all about either of those guys for Sunday?
I was going to maybe play devil's advocate until I heard that Kyle Pitts liked your tweet about Kyle Pitts, and
That's the
it seems
closer.
like something
Yeah.
that's a good sign. I'll take that. So I guess I don't have any concerns about Kyle Pitts. Maybe a little bit about Landman, just because he has, been working his way back for so long. I'm sure they expect him out there on Sunday. Maybe we'll see a little bit more JD Bertrand. But I'm also hoping we see a lot more Troy Anderson. So if he's a little bit limited week one, that's probably not the end of the world.
Yeah. I think it seems like, based on the depth chart too, that the Falcons want to start Troy Anderson. I think most of us, I think, that have been paying really close attention to the way they might want to build this defense is like they probably want Troy to be the Mike linebacker and handle the coverage responsibilities and that stuff. Because like while Caden Ellis was fine in that role, he's here to rush the passer. Like he is a pass rusher. He's a run defender. He can cover and do Mike stuff for you, but like he's a pass rusher. They're gonna want him to be their sim pressure king, who's gonna go out there and try to wreak havoc and do whatever he can there. And Nate Landman too would be a great guy to have in that sort of secondary linebacker role where he could sort of be more free to go make tackles in the run game, where we know he's just so solid in that area. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to see Troy Anderson's debut. He looks like he's going to get a lot of snaps. We'll see if Nate Landman, how many snaps he would get in that rotation versus, Troy Anderson or what have you. But especially if Landman's limited in any way with an injury, then you'd have to think that they're going to try to give Troy as much as he can handle. And I hope it works out. I think Anderson's one of the most interesting guys on this roster, in my opinion, like in terms of just true wild card type players, where if he does sort of like reach what he can achieve, like with his talent, that could be something that changes the whole complexion of the defense. Like having dropping a Fred Warner into this defense. Not saying that he's going to be anywhere near Fred Warner, but if you did drop Fred Warner into this defense, that would it changes everything. Everyone wants to talk about how linebackers don't matter until you have a really good one, and it does make a huge difference for your team. So, yeah, pretty excited to see how that works out. But I think ultimately that's why you have three good linebackers. Inevitably, one's going to have to miss time, and they got three of them. So if Nate Landman is slowed down at all, then hopefully we'll have Troy Anderson ready to step up. I'm really excited about Troy Anderson. And we could kind of start there, as we get into talking about this game and this week and our expectations. But Tre'Shon, is there any? It could be Troy Anderson, but are there any guys like over the course of this offseason or whatever that like you're really excited to see now? Because we didn't get to see the starters at all in the preseason. So is there anyone in particular they're just like really like excited to see this guy on Sunday?
But besides Kirk Cousins, because I think that's kind of the obvious one, I'm really excited to see David Onyemata, especially in this week one opener. I think now with Grady being back and we think he's healthy and everything like that, obviously expecting, big performance, big comeback season for Grady, but I think David Onyemata really has a chance to build on, a great season that he had last year, because he's also benefiting from all the other guys in the room. And so with him, maybe getting a little bit more of a snap count control here moving forward with the amount of bodies we have, and him being much more fresh on some of these obvious passing situations, I'm really excited to see, if he can kind of build off of the season that he just had. And I think that could go down. Like, it's such a sneaky good signing by Terry at this point now. And the deal's almost structured in that they could technically, get out of it, without much pain if things don't go the way they want them to this year. But that could be one of the best signings for Terry when it's all said and done by the time that contract comes out. I'm really excited to see him this year, and hoping that he just continues to build off of, what he's already laid.
Yeah, I think like that interior has the opportunity, I think, to be so good. Like when we saw Jarrett and Onyemata, and we didn't get to see it a ton, but when we saw it for those 6 weeks or whatever, when both those guys were healthy, they were wrecking shop. Like it was like, oh my gosh, like I haven't seen the Falcons interior look like this since like prime Abraham and Babineau, like Corey Peters years. It's been a long time since I've seen anything like that. So I think the potential for that group to be outstanding is up there. And you add a guy like Matthew Judon to the mix, to actually bring something off the edge that defenses can't just ignore. I'm excited to see how that turns out, but I don't want to steal any potential players from Dave. Dave, is there anyone in particular that you're looking forward to? Maybe it is one of these guys. Maybe it is Judon. He's not off the table. I just mentioned his name. So if there's any guys you want to talk about,
well,
go for it.
You did steal a little bit of my thunder.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
I was going to say Judon, so it's
go for it.
It's really exciting. Like, we have wandered the desert for so many years, and like it's been a running gag that like we're looking for a guy of Judon's caliber. We're never going to get him ever. We can't have that. John Abraham was our last great pass rusher before the sun dies out, and here we are. We have him. So like, for me, it's impossible not to be excited by like what a healthy Judon can do for this defense, because just a year ago in 4 games he had 4 sacks. And like, this is a really good player, the best they've had in quite some time. So I'm just excited to see what he can do, particularly because we know that at this stage of his career, like, Russell Wilson's going to scamper a little, right? And I'm hoping he scampers right into Matthew Judon. And if we didn't have him, I will take advantage of that. But I think this is a situation where, having that kind of elite player with a quarterback with bad tendencies should be a fun combination.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's nice to just have that presence. I think that's what the Falcons have kind of been missing for years and years. And the thing about Judon too is he's a complete player on the edge. This isn't a guy that, like, it's different than if we had acquired like Hassan Reddick. I think Judon's more in the vein of like a Montez Sweat. I think Montez Sweat obviously went for a higher pick because, with he's young, right? Young, entering his prime. Judon's kind of on the tail end of his prime. But the Falcons only had to send a third instead of like basically what amounted to be like almost a first round pick with the pick the Bears ended up sending. So you get a little bit of a discount for a guy that's a little bit more proven in Judon, but probably doesn't have as long of a runway in terms of the rest of his career. So, I think that unlike Hassan Reddick, who would probably be a designated pass rusher, the Falcons would not be able, like, he just doesn't defend the run. It's just kind of his thing, right? He'll try, a little bit, but it's just really not his thing. And also he's not playing as far as we know at this point. He's still holding out. So, great job, Jets. But, yeah, I think that Judon is going to be a tremendous boost to this team on all 3 downs, and I think he'll see as many snaps as he can handle in this defense. And I think when you push everyone else on the edge group like down a spot on the depth chart, it looks a little bit better. It's like, Lorenzo Carter as like a secondary guy, okay. Arnold Ebiketie as like a designated pass rusher, okay. Like, I can get behind that. Where it was like, oh, those guys are starting. Oh yeah, we're so screwed. Yeah. So it feels slightly better about that situation now. So yeah, I like both of those choices. And I'm still a Troy Anderson believer, so I'm going all in on him. I'm really excited to see how he looks. Funny enough, we did everyone on the defense, so we'll probably do offense after this. But Sour Pickle, great name by the way, just mentioned the cap space that was created today, and I forgot to tackle that off the top because I know a lot of people were wondering like, oh, is there going to be a big move coming now from this? And like, we haven't seen anything yet. There could be a move, Sour Pickle. I don't know that it's going to be like a big thing. I know there were a bunch of like player tweets where they were sending out the eyes emoji or something, like that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It doesn't not mean anything, but yeah, we don't have anything to share with regards to that. So there could be something coming. It, most likely probably like they're going to fill that spot and maybe they're working on something. But ultimately, I think the reason they cleared the cap was because they just wanted to have some money to go into the season with and not have to worry about it later. And for those that don't know, when you do a restructure, you change base salary into signing bonus, so that it's signing bonus is always prorated over the length of the contract. So when you change that base salary into signing bonus, you like shrink it down essentially, and like it spreads it out over the rest of the contract. So his cap hit went down by about $7.5 million this year, and that $7.5 million got spread out over the rest of the contract. So it's not a huge amount over the remaining like 3 years of his deal, which is why it's good to restructure players early in the deal, not late. So that's the reason they did it in week 1, because you get less and less value out of a restructure if you do it later, because the base salary shrinks every week with the game check. So Tre'Shon, I know you had a tweet about that too. Do you think there's something being cooked up here, or do you think it's more of like just sort of creating some extra money?
Yeah, Terry is Terry likes to have some walking around money during the season. He likes to have a little bit of change in his pocket, and I think that that's worked out well for him. We've made a couple of mid-season trades here and there. That's how we acquired Street and Van Jefferson last year. And when we've dealt with injuries specifically, that's really the other time that you want to have a little bit of this money sitting around. So I do think that it's probably a little bit more of just proactive GMing and less about some imminent move or anything like that. But man, as long as that last spot on the 53 stays open, it definitely is hard to, completely turn away the idea that maybe somebody like Akila Witherspoon, who, that's kind of a budget friendly signing, or somebody like that, could be coming through, or something. But I don't really see anything other than just kind of proactive GMing.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. Dave, do you agree, or do you think there's some blockbuster trade brewing right now?
I mean, they already made the Nathan Peterman move, so like,
Yeah,
what other big move is out there that you could make at this point? I do think we'll get a signing, maybe, I hope, by this weekend, just to fill that last spot. But no, I'm not expecting any big names. If it is like a Witherspoon, they're not going to ask him to play week 1 anyways. So, it feels like they're holding that spot open with some intent. I don't know what that intent is, but I do think, to borrow a phrase, it's Terry's walking around money. He's got some coins jingling in his pocket, and that makes him happy. And,
I like that. I like that
him.
analogy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you guys for joining us today. Appreciate everyone. Please like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Really appreciate that. Excuse me. Yeah. So let's transition over to the same question on the offensive side of the ball. And Dave, I will not steal your thunder by mentioning anyone this time. Is there anyone in particular on offense that you're just itching to see? Since again, we didn't really get to see any of the starters during the preseason.
I mean, there's a lot of obvious answers on that side of the ball, right? Like pretty much anybody. Maybe not Jake Matthews. Not that we don't love Jake Matthews, but like it's hard to get excited about seeing Matthews. We've seen him a lot. But I would say Kirk Cousins. Just with the level of investment, with the expectation that he's going to raise the floor of this offense so much higher than it's been the last couple of years, and just with some lingering questions about how close to 100% he is. He's the guy that I really want to see. I want to see him looking good and confident out there against a good Steelers defense. And as long as he looks healthy and he's doesn't catch Desmond Ritter disease just by wearing a Falcons helmet, I think we're going to be just fine. So I'm really excited to see what he can do, and to remind myself of what it was like for like almost 15 years when the Falcons had a really good passing attack every single year. So
yeah, no, I'm excited to see that as well. And yeah, like you said, no shortage of guys. So I'm curious where you go, Tre'Shon. Who's your guy that you're really itching to see for the first time in week 1?
I'm gonna stick in the trenches here, and I'm gonna go with Matthew Bergeron, somebody that is gonna need to perform well to help Kirk Cousins, not catch some Desmond Ritter disease. I think the iceberg has the potential to, I think so much growth and so much development left in front of him. He had a very solid rookie year. He still had, your typical rookie moments of young offensive linemen. And that's just part of the game, right? And now we're in year 2. Ledford stuck around. We were able to retain him. And I think that's going to be great for him and his development. And he is going to have a tough assignment with Cam Hayward and the Steelers front in front of him. And it's going to be a good matchup week 1. And I'm really looking forward to see, how much he's grown over the offseason. Is he somebody that's going to be able to develop into an elite pass blocker? He showed us so many flashes in the run game. And I mean, he was just phenomenal there. And now, the next step for him is really improving on the pass pro side. And I think that this is a really, tough Steelers interior defensive line. And it's a good challenge week 1 for him. And, for Dahlman and Lindstrom as well. And last year we saw when we faced a tough interior Carolina, Derek Brown kind of had his way. And, I have a strong feeling that that's probably on the minds of the guys as well. They remember how rough last year's start to the season was. And, I don't think that they want to repeat that. And I think Bergeron is somebody that, I'm really excited to see. And I'm hoping that, he's that left guard and we're used to seeing him there for the next 10, 11 years, similar to Matthews.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think Bergeron's definitely like whenever anybody asks me for like a breakout guy on the offense, it's always Bergeron because I think they really obviously they need him to, but it's like when you see a guy who has to change positions and change side of the line, and it's not like Bergeron's never played on the left side throughout his college career, but he spent his entire final season at right tackle. So not only are you now switching over to the left and go to guard, that's not easy at all. That's a tough transition, and he was solid. Like I think that there's not, he wasn't a world beater, but he was a solid player, a solid starter as a rookie at a new position. That's a very good sign for a guy's long-term development. And I think that, going forward, you should expect him to take a step forward, but it's how big is that step, right? I think with Lindstrom, we kind of saw that. Obviously, Lindstrom missed a lot of time early in his career, but, once he got it, he like hit the ground running. And I hope that we could get a transition, like a second year, as good as that, where it's like, oh, this guy's now like, we're going to see that PFF grade go from like 60 to 75. And it's like, okay, now if you get that, like we're talking about an elite offensive line. And you said it. I mean, there's a tough test coming this week. Everyone knows the Steelers' edge rushers are two of the best in the entire NFL. But the interior is good too. They got Keanu Benton in there. Like you said, Cam Hayward. He's not in his prime anymore, but still just a very good, very experienced interior player.
Benton's nasty, man.
Yeah.
I remember we were watching him at the Senior Bowl, and he was just wrecking shop. So,
Yeah, so that they're going to have their hands full. And obviously the Steelers defense is the strength of that team. So, they're going to, if the Falcons can block it up in front, I think the Steelers secondary is vulnerable. Like it's not terrible. I mean, they have good safety play on the back end, and I think we saw a good rookie season from Joey Porter Jr., but, Joey Porter Jr. is one of those corners where it's like if it's a short rep and there's pressure, he's going to smother guys. But if you get that rep going longer, he can get beat in a foot race. That's always been kind of his weakness. So, that could be a situation where if the Falcons can protect it up, they could get some big plays through the air. But, this kind of transitioned into our look more at this Steelers game specifically. But, I definitely want to see, like, we paid a lot of money for Darnell Mooney. And I think a lot of people were like, is this guy worth $13 million a year? I mean, he was like, you look at all these stats for 2023 and he was like all among the league's worst, receivers and all this and that. But you look back a couple years, this guy had 1,000 yards on a bad team. So it's like, who is the real Darnell Mooney? And I think a lot of it has to do with how he's being utilized and who his quarterback is. I think some people think that he's going to be Scotty Miller, like he's just going to take the top off, run down field, clear stuff out. He's not going to be Scotty Miller. They didn't pay $13 million for Scotty Miller. If they wanted Scotty Miller, they could have signed him for the vet minimum and just had him run, clear out goes every single snap. They're not doing that with Mooney. I think they like his ability to separate and be a dynamic option opposite Drake London and Kyle Pitts. But how do they actually deploy him? Does he switch between outside and the slot? That's what I want to know. Like, are they going to move him around? Are they going to play him at different spots? He played a lot outside, it seems like, in training camp, but the idea, I'm interested to see how they utilize him a lot. I think he's one of the more interesting, like, less known guys on this offense that, again, we haven't been able to see in a live game situation at all. So that's an exciting one to think about as we get questions from George Costanza, who's back from vacation. George says he was in Aruba and then on a cruise to Alaska. So shout out to George for touring around. But George says with the $2, my biggest fear is us running those famed 3 safety sets. But if Richie Grant and Troy Anderson could take a step forward, then we could actually have a pretty good defense, perhaps even a Super Bowl defense. I think the defense is going to be much better than people think. And I'm wondering, could this even be a top 12 defense, which along with a potential, top 5 offense, that could be a Super Bowl team. I think that's very aggressive, George, but I do think this defense is going to be better than last year's defense. And I didn't think that up until until after the Simmons and Judon moves were announced. But now I think that when you take into account all the offensive additions and the fact this offense there's no way this offense is going to turn the ball over like they did last year. So I think you add that to the mix. So you're giving the ball to the opponent a lot less, and I think just got better talent top to bottom on this defense. Obviously you'd like to still have Calais Campbell, but you've brought in good guys to help bolster the defense in various spots. So I do think that this is ultimately going to be a better defense. Will it be top 12? I don't know about that. I think we're hoping for like an above average defense. And if we can get there, then yeah, this team should win a lot of games, especially with their schedule. But yeah, what do you guys think, Tre'Shon? What do you think about this defense? What do you see as sort of their potential with all these new additions?
Yeah. Well, George Costanza has never sounded more optimistic. But I'm just really hoping that the pass defense can rise up to the level of the run defense where it was at last year. And then I think that kind of gives us, an average defense. And I would be very happy with an average defense at this point overall. And I think that is a realistic target. And I think that's probably where it's going to fall. Obviously, there's a lot of conversations around cornerback 2 and everything like that that's been going on. And, I think those are legitimate concerns, but I think that overall, it's really going to come down to, can this interior defensive pressure do the job that this staff believes it can do? And that's being the driver of this defense's pass rush. Can Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake effectively implement their sim pressures with Judon and Ebiketie? If those two things can be accomplished, then I'm really not super worried about the back end of this defense, knowing that Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates and AJ Terrell are all back there. Like, yes, you're going to have a couple of holes. Pretty much every team has a couple of holes. So that's not, really, my biggest concern. It just comes down to whether or not this pass rush plan is going to work out. And that kind of seems to be, the big question mark every year when it comes to this defense. And then to your point earlier, Kevin, if Troy Anderson hits that next gear, then that really will help this defense be, in that, league's, top 15, top 16 range. And if the offense performs the way that we believe it can, that's going to be more than enough, I think, to make some noise and make a legitimate push in the playoffs. Is it going to be enough to push into the Super Bowl? Who knows? But once you get to the playoffs, it's anyone's game at that point. Anybody has a shot. But I think it can push you past the wild card. I think it can maybe push you past the divisional round or make you competitive in it. And so, that's kind of what I'm just hoping to see.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this team has a ton of potential. And Dave, I'm curious what you think about this defense. And like Tre'Shon said, there's been a ton of consternation around corner 2, but how much does corner 2 really matter? Like, go look around the NFL at everyone's cornerback 2s. Just like go to Our Lad, keep this open, but open another tab, go to Our Lads, and look at the depth charts and tell me how many cornerback 2s you think look great. But, what do you think about that, Dave? Do you think that sort of is overrated, the importance of corner 2, and how do you sort of feel about the defense overall?
I think it's probably overrated. I think at some point in the first 4 or so weeks, it's going to feel very not overrated. I am not a Mike Hughes guy, and I apologize to Mike Hughes.
UCF legend?
Yeah, it's as a returner, as a corner, he certainly has his talent, his skills, but I tend to think like this is not sort of the ideal situation for them to have him as their second corner. To your point, does it really matter when he's got AJ Terrell, when he has D. Alford, who is a super underrated player at the nickel, and then Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons back there? Probably not. Will there be some plays in the first few weeks of the season that go really awry and make everyone want to bench Mike Hughes? Probably. It's a question of where things go from there. But Do I view it as like a season sinking sort of thing? No. I think this defense probably, if they stay reasonably healthy, bottoms out as like a slightly below average unit. And I think, sort of what we saw from them late in the year post Grady Jarrett is as bad as I can see it getting, which wasn't great, obviously. But this year you do have, a better plan behind Jarrett and Onyemata. You do have hopefully a healthier inside linebacker core. You have Matthew Judon, who you did not have a year ago. You have Justin Simmons, who you did not have a year ago. They've added enough talent, and they have sort of more of a focus on defense in general. It's not just Ryan Nielsen's mustache doing all of the work here. So to me, I'm excited about it. I am probably a little bit more cautiously optimistic than many, simply because there's been so many years of this, right? Like I've talked myself into things that haven't come to pass. So this does feel, though, like it won't be a liability, and it has a chance to be a very good defense. A few big plays here and there aside. And I think it's really exciting, actually, to get the Steelers first and foremost here, because their offense, to me, looks like a mess, potentially.
Yeah. I recorded a Steelers preview for Believe in Steelers with Mark Bergen today. We're going to do one for this channel that's going to come out Friday. And that conversation was great, went over an hour, so we actually didn't have time to film mine, like afterwards we both had to go. But like basically we got into that, and it's like there's a lot of concerns surrounding the Steelers offense, and we're definitely going to get into that shortly on this show as well. But I agree with you, Dave. I think cornerback 2 issues are overrated, and also like this is the week you probably want Mike Hughes out there, because the Steelers, if they know what's good for them, they will just pound the rock. They will try to run the football as much as possible. And I think that's their plan. Mike Hughes is a lot bigger. He's a big body corner. And he is a good run defender. I actually thought D'Alford was a better run defender, even though the Falcons said Mike Hughes is a better run defender. I don't think the stats and PFF really like bore that out, but whatever. Mike Hughes is a fine run defender outside, what have you. But I think ultimately, like, if Hughes struggles enough in coverage, they will pull him for either Clark Phillips or for Antonio Hamilton. And I feel good about both of those guys coming in off the bench, especially I like Clark Phillips and I'd like to see him get a shot. But I think if push comes to shove, you just put Antonio Hamilton out there and you don't really have to worry about it. I think he would be totally fine as a coverage guy out there. So the depth helps make it not as big of a deal, because you've got 2, I think, quality reserve corners that if Hughes does struggle and he doesn't get back to his like Kansas City level, where he actually, if you guys remember, this is a while ago now, back in 2022 when Hughes played for Kansas City, he played outside, started outside, was an above average starting cornerback outside. And then the Falcons probably took him, put him back in the slot, where he's never been good. That was a mistake, but maybe he's just a better outside corner. So that's my hope, for the UCF legend to get back on the horse. And the same, UCF legend Richie Grant. I know George is panicked about Richie Grant. I mean, I personally don't think it's worth taking like your slot corner and D'Alford off the field for Richie Grant. I hope that they don't. But I'm open to Richie Grant being a better fit, especially as like a third safety that's out there. Like, he's probably going to have a specialized role in that package. He's not going to be asked to go play deep and do all this stuff. I don't really see a scenario where like I'd rather have Richie Grant on the field than D'Alford, so I hope they don't do that. But it could be if they're going to like a dime package or something like that. They want to get another secondary player out there instead of like another linebacker. Maybe there's a situation where that could make sense. And I could accept that Richie Grant could be a decent third safety, maybe more. If he wants to really like prove all my draft takes right, he could start to play well right about now. That would go a long way to helping with my bad takes from years ago. But I think this defense in general is pretty exciting. This is a big takeaway there. Offensively, I think we have a lot of hope, and we mentioned it earlier, right? That Kirk Cousins raises the floor of this offense tremendously. They shouldn't turn the damn ball over as much. That should help. But I think, and we mentioned it, I think this week in particular, the offensive line is absolutely critical, and not making mistakes, because this is still a really good Steelers defense. But the one place I think the Steelers are most vulnerable is at slot corner, because Cam Sutton has been suspended for 8 games for domestic violence related stuff. And they are now starting undrafted rookie. I'm going to have to pull this up. I feel very disrespectful to this player. shout out to him first of all for not only making the 53 as an undrafted free agent, yeah, but also starting, and that may or may not be a good thing overall for the Steelers. But his name is Beanie Bishop Jr. He's from West Virginia. I have to admit that I'd never heard of this player. I didn't remember him from scouting circles last year either, but he came out of nowhere, made the Steelers roster. He's going to be starting in the slot. He's a whopping 5'10", 184. So he's Clark Phillips, essentially, in terms of size. So, yeah, I mean, Dave, what do you think? Do you think this is a situation where we actually try to utilize the slot? Arthur Smith never really did. So are we going to actually just open up trying to attack the slot of the opposing team with either a slot receiver or perhaps a tight end that plays in the slot?
I've never heard of such a thing, but
I know it's black magic. It's black magic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think we will. I think this is a very different offense, very different coaching staff, very different philosophy. You can actually attack opponent weaknesses if you want to, if the spirit moves you. So this feels like one of those opportunities where they have multiple guys. I think you can play Mooney in the slot, obviously. You can play Ray McLeod, who I'm excited to see too, even though he didn't make my short list there. And you can play Pitts and try to get that ridiculous kind of mismatch, I think, against Bishop, who is, again, an undrafted free agent coming into this league. There's a huge size difference there. So there's an opportunity for them to be a little bit creative and try to attack Bishop throughout this game and just see whether this is a situation born out of a dire emergency and this is just who the Steelers felt they could roll with because they were familiar with him, or if this is somebody that they put their faith in for the right reason. I think you have to test that. You can't leave it unchallenged because the Steelers otherwise have a pretty good secondary. So to me, that's the game plan to use. And also, if you have the opportunity, maybe try to run right at him as well. Just make a game of it. Have some fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think, and I know Joe Schmo brought up a good point. Like, could we possibly see the Steelers roll with safety Devontae KZ, former Falcon, and the nickel instead of Beanie Bishop? I guess that's an option. It seems to me like they've mostly used KZ at safety there, but I mean, I don't know enough about Pittsburgh's defense to tell you. But, KZ's thing is always that he's been undersized for safety. So I don't know what his true weight is, but I know he was listed at 5'10", 180 or something like that. So they're not really getting a size upgrade there. But yeah, in terms of experience, that wouldn't shock me if they do that. But either way, they're going to be playing an undersized slot in that case. But yeah, Tre'Shon, what do you think? I mean, where would you go after this Steelers defense if you were calling the plays?
Yeah, I just had to look it up because I'm like, why does Beanie Bishop sound familiar to me? And he had one of his best games against my Oklahoma State Cowboys last year. So go figure. I'm like, oh yeah, this guy had 4 passes defended, was just flying around. So I don't know. We might have to be careful. So I'm probably with you, Kevin. I think slot, and then the linebacker play wasn't really too great from the Steelers last year. I'm not really sure what it's going to look like this year, but Mike Tomlin made a point of pointing out this week that Kyle Pitts and Drake London are matchup issues. And so I think that kind of leans into what you were just going into, in that we might see some creative looks. They might throw KZ at him, and sometimes they may even put Minka on him a couple of times. I think they're definitely going to get creative, and we're gonna see a few different looks. And I think that kind of just shows that is the area you should attack. Maybe we see the ever elusive power slot role come to fruition, and Drake London starts getting a lot of work this game playing inside. Maybe it's Pitts in that role. So I'm with you. I'm thinking the middle of the field, that intermediate zone, is where I'm looking at, attacking the seams and the hashes. And luckily for us, that's what Kirk was killing it at last year. I mean, this is really where he was on a tear, was in the intermediate passing range. So that's where I would want to stick. I want Kirk to be as comfortable as possible game one, get the ball out quick. And, I think that attacking the middle of the field is going to achieve that.
Yeah, I agree. I like that style. And, we haven't seen this offense, like what it looks like. I think I've on record as saying I think what we saw in the preseason was an absolute lie. I think that was a total lie. That entire offensive system they showed, like 98% 11, no motion, like very little play action, like all. I think they were just like not like just not showing anything, like actively like lying, just like this is not what we're doing. Like so I'm really interested to see what they actually do deploy, and they may have an advantage because of that, because Zach Robinson's never called plays. This is a completely new system, and the Falcons showed absolutely nothing. They showed absolutely nothing to us in camp either. Like, they were very tight-lipped about what they would let us see or report on. So I'm sure they are hoping to catch the Steelers unawares, which would go a long way when you're going up against a great defense like Pittsburgh. But Dave, I'm curious what do you think they do to sort of slow down Pittsburgh's pass rush? Because I think that's the biggest concern. I think you look at Pittsburgh's secondary, they've obviously got Minka, who's coming off a down year, but still very good. And then they have, I think Joey Porter Jr. had a good rookie season, but he's liable to get burned sometimes. I mean, it happens to the best corners. It's not that crazy. Dante Jackson's their other corner, and the Falcons have cooked the hell out of Dante Jackson in the past. So, I'm not super concerned there. So that might be, they might throw, I mean, if they could get Drake London on Dante Jackson every snap, I think they would love that and just let Darnell Mooney try to get past Joey Porter. But if the Steelers are smart, they'll make Joey Porter play Drake London. But we'll see how they play that. But I'm curious, how would you sort of go after this Steelers defense, and how would you sort of slow down that lethal pass rush, Dave?
Yeah, I wonder if we'll see, last year, obviously the volume of passes that Bijan was getting, he maybe wasn't ready for that. It didn't work out, I think, the way that Arthur Smith envisioned. I do wonder if this is a game where we see more of that, where we try to mitigate that a little bit by putting the ball in his hands quickly, letting him do the work that he can do. Probably see a little bit more Charlie Warner than, I don't want to say than Pitts. I just did say it, but we'll see a lot of Charlie Warner. I think he's going to be essential here for his pass protection acumen, and also to help free up maybe some room for Robinson and McLeod, another guy I think could get more targets in this one to work with. So I think you try to get that ball out quickly. You try to let these guys do what they do after the catch. On those plays where you want to be looking downfield, I do wonder if we'll see some more help from Tyler Algier, who I think is just light years ahead of Bijan in pass protection. I don't think he's made that up in one offseason. As good as Robinson will be this year, Algier is just much more refined. So I think it'll probably be a mix, right? They're still going to want to try to attack the secondary with some of the holes that they have. They're not going to just do, screen short passes all game long, but I do expect a little bit of a reliance on that to try to mitigate that pass rush a little bit. And then just seeing more Warner, more Algier, more options to come in and block and give Kirk Cousins that time to work with, especially because there's no fullback on the roster.
Yes. R.I.P. the fullback. Yep. R.I.P. the fullback in Atlanta. We have left that behind. But, going over to the Pittsburgh offensive side of the ball, a lot of familiar faces we touched on at the top of the show. Arthur Smith heading to Pittsburgh. Van Jefferson now starting opposite George Pickens for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Steelers, I'll just come out and say it. You look at the way this Steelers offense is crafted and what they did at quarterback and who they decided to run as the starter at quarterback. Am I alone in thinking like Arthur Smith has learned absolutely nothing with the way this team has been constructed? Because like you don't invest in quarterback. That was the biggest problem in Arthur Smith's tenure in Atlanta, was that he didn't invest in quarterback. What did the Steelers do? Get the cheapest possible option in Russell Wilson, who was like cheaper, like he's on the lowest deal of any quarterback. Now he's not the worst quarterback, so like value-wise, it's a fine maneuver. And then trade for Justin Fields, whose value is so depressed that he ended up going for basically nothing, and then ends up choosing to roll out Russell Wilson over Justin Fields at this point in Russell Wilson's career, and then ignores the wide receiver. Now, Roman Wilson they did draft, but he's been hurt, so he's probably not going to play this week. But even so, like, ignores the wide receiver position to the point where Van Jefferson, who how many yards did Van Jefferson have in Atlanta last year after he got like a lion's share of snaps, like 100 yards? I mean, it was really bad. He goes out and acquires this man who is now starting, and I'm just, he's going to split carries between two running backs, like, and when one of them's probably better than the other, but they're kind of still, and the thing with Pittsburgh is the offensive line is way worse than it ever was in Atlanta. So it's like I look at how this has played out, and I'm like, he's just going to do it again. He's just going to do the same thing again. So, yeah,
the fun Van Jefferson stat that I saw today when I was researching an article is that among qualifying receivers, nobody had a lower catch rate than Van Jefferson last year.
Yeah.
And now, do you blame the quarterback for some of that? Absolutely.
Yes.
Should he be your number 2 receiver in any circumstance? Probably not. No.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Tre'Shon, what do you think about this? I mean, I feel very like vindicated in that, wow, Atlanta made the right decision, because this man did not, I don't think he changed at all.
Very rarely do you get to see what your team would have done in a scenario in which they would have kept a coach they fired. You don't really get to see that too often. And, a couple more Falcons just that we haven't mentioned, just Cordell Patterson, Michael Pruitt, even Ade Ogundeji found his way over to the practice squad of the Steelers. So, there was a funny quote from Art in an interview today talking about how he feels much lighter as the offensive coordinator because he doesn't have to worry about any of these player personnel decisions. And so I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because there's like 5 Falcons on this team right now, but it's just mere coincidence that, they're all primarily on offense. Most of them are looking and expected to get a decent amount of run. So yeah, I just don't I don't really understand, I guess, this approach. And I'm sure there's some method to the madness. There was always some explanation for, why things were done the way they were. But I personally am happy that we don't have to try to run this back again. And like you said, definitely feeling validated about the decision by the franchise to move on, because it really feels like this is what the Falcons were going to be this year. Maybe Art says we're taking Penix at 8. I want that to be my guy. Doesn't seem like it would have been much of a fit for him personally. So I don't know if that is what the case would have been. And I think you're looking at, we would have had the Justin Fields versus Russell Wilson camp battle. And yeah, so, I'm like I said, just happy that it's not us.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, I was talking with Mark Bergen about this, like, and I told him, so he was like, oh yeah, what do you think about who they chose at quarterback? I think they made the wrong decision. I mean, like, Russell Wilson's not good enough. Like, he's just not, and that. And yeah, he's gonna limit turnovers. So at least there's that. Like, if we had Russell Wilson here last year, we probably win 9 games, because at least we don't turn the ball over 50 times or whatever it was. Like, but like, that Steelers offense is just not good enough. Like, the offensive line is a real problem, and like some of that's injury related, right? They lost Isaac Suamalo like right before the season. That's not Arthur Smith's fault. But
they lost Nate Herbig too, a couple weeks ago as well. Yeah.
So you lose 2 starters, that's like to injury. That's not a team preparation problem. But you're also like rolling out Broderick Jones at tackle, and then, obviously Troy Fatano too. He may not play because he's only gotten like 1 practice in at this point.
Yeah.
So some of the injuries, that's obviously not Arthur Smith's fault or the staff in general's fault, but like, that offensive line is nowhere near Atlanta's offensive line last year. And with all the other stuff that's going on, like, I just don't, like, I don't know how you put Russ behind that offensive line and think anything good's going to happen. Like, he can't escape anymore. He can't. We saw it in the preseason. This man was sacked like 3 times in a preseason game.
But he's going to try.
And he will. He believes he can. He has total faith in himself. So there's that. But
yeah. It really does feel like it's built for, like, okay, we're just going to put Fields back here and pray. Like, because that just kind of seems like what the setup is. We don't have the best weapons. Like, we've got George. And, Jalen Warren's not super healthy right now. And, shout out Pat Fairmouth, really solid tight end out there, throwback tight end. But, it's just kind of one of those things. But it does seem like, is this, the narrative kind of surrounding it is, well, it's easier to go to Fields later in the season than the other way around. And, I guess I understand that kind of thinking, but if a coaching staff is actually having that kind of thought process, that's a huge red flag, because you're basically admitting, like, yeah, this probably is not going to work out too well regardless. So we're just going to throw Fields in at the end of this, and everyone's going to be like, oh, well, look, this was actually the better move. This it all worked out somehow, and well, they'll be fine next year. So I don't know.
Yeah. I just feel like I think this is like proof that Smith hasn't evolved, because you throw Fields into this equation in Pittsburgh, and I think that you see you could like build something here. And will it be good? I don't know. But like, you have one of the best, like, other than Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields is the best running quarterback in the NFL. And he's got a cannon. It doesn't always land in the right spot. It's more like a mortar, like, than a cannon. It doesn't always fly straight. Kind of, it arcs up and lands somewhere in that general area. But when you, like, they have a 2 running back thing, and they want to pound the rock. So if you add Justin Fields to that, when was this offense the best under Arthur Smith? When they had Mariota, who actually threatened on the ground. And like, Justin Fields is far better as a runner than Mariota is, and he's got a better arm. Now he's just a crazy person with the football in his hand, and will just try to spin out of sacks and throw the ball where it shouldn't go and things like that. But like, I just feel like with Russ, the ceiling is so low that it's like, if you go up against good defenses, you're just going to be cooked. Like, you're just not going to be able to do anything. Whereas with Fields, like, he could just go off. Like, you could win some games from him just going off. Now you'll probably lose some games because of him too. So maybe it's a wash, but man, like, I think you got to go for it. Like, they don't have the weapons to prop up Russell Wilson. They don't have the offensive line to protect him. So your only hope, in my opinion, would be like, let's try to do this crazy, like, super run heavy offense where we make Fields carry the ball like 200 times. And like, we're going to give as many carries to Najee and Warren as possible, and just try to, use that to paper over our offensive line and lack of weapons problems. And maybe we'll throw a few bombs to George Pickens, because if anyone can catch that inaccurate pass downfield, it's George Pickens. I mean, that's probably his calling card. So, but it's like, they just didn't do it. They were like, nah, we're going to trot Russell Wilson out there, and we're going to, run a standard 12 personnel attack. So
I was expecting Art to go full Greg Roman after the Fields trade.
Right.
I was like, oh, he gets it. He's like, I Mariota did great. Like you were saying, I can build off that. I can reel Justin in, help him just take a couple of key shots a game, and do something a little different. But, it feels like he keeps chasing the dragon from Tennessee, keeps trying to recreate what he had in Tennessee. And I just don't think he's accepted the fact that was really just a perfect marriage of player personnel and scheme. And he just does not have that personnel, and he can't, he keeps trying to find it. He keeps trying to supplement it, and it's just not working. And he's not, to your point, Kevin, I think really evolving, as an offensive play caller, which is a bummer, because Art really did display some of the best run concepts out there. And this really did seem like a situation where he could lean into that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a shame. And I wonder, like, are we just gonna get outside zone again? Like, is it gonna be just a million outside zone runs against Atlanta? Because you have to imagine Atlanta's prepared for that. If anyone's gonna be prepared, it's gonna be this team. So, I guess we'll see. But yeah, Dave, what do you think about this Steelers offense? I mean, it looks like a disaster for me. Do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there will be some moments, right?
Yeah.
There always is, and I do think the tight end position suddenly becomes interesting. Like, I just traded for him in fantasy, full disclosure, not because I hope he does well against Atlanta, but like, scored 2 touchdowns each of the last 2 years. Probably going to be a much bigger part of the game plan. Will probably something drastically improves, but it feels like Wilson and Smith are kind of like, aging, rock stars, and like they're playing the hits, but they don't play them as well. But they're not going to stop playing the hits, because that's what they know and that's what people love. And I imagine that he's looking at Wilson and thinking, this is a guy that, he will listen to what I say up to a point, and he's still an effective play action passer. So he's going to excel despite all of the problems this offense has. Like I can't get inside this man's head, at this point. He went through a lot in Atlanta. A lot of it was self-inflicted, but I think it's maybe put in some scar tissue that he can't get rid of. And so to me, you look at the pieces of this offense, like there's the basics for a good ground game here. There's probably going to be some really nice things for George Pickens, for Freiermuth as well. But beyond that, it's hard to see this team doing much of anything. And I think not really knowing what this is going to look like aside from past experience with Arthur Smith means you know exactly what this is going to look like, which is kind of depressing. So
yeah, it is. It's sad. And I know there's a lot of fans that have big problems with Arthur Smith, like personally. I will reiterate that he had this like gruff sort of public persona, but like in person, much warmer, much nicer. But he did endear himself to the fans, that's for sure. And I think there's a lot of fans pulling for the Falcons to really lay it on this weekend. I mean, I wouldn't be upset if they do. Not necessarily to stick it to Smith, just because I'd love them to open the season with a strong win, considering who their next two games are. And yeah. So they need to win this one, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, one thing I wanted to touch on is like our final topic, and I know we got a couple questions here. Oh yeah, we got George saying, "Be serious though. Only Steelers fans could be happy about replacing Matt Canada with Arthur Smith and calling it an upgrade." The smallest of upgrades, yes. I do think it is an upgrade, though. Like, let's be honest, it probably is still an upgrade, ultimately. And then we have Jason Gaines with the $2. Thank you, Jason. Says, "I can't wait to see that Cordarrelle Patterson blocking tight end snap, the Najee Harris pass off a double reverse." And what do you guys think? Should the Falcons run up the score on Smith after doing a QB kneel on the previous play? No, that is downright disrespectful. I would have none of that. I would want them to run up the score, but they do it straight up. You just run it right at him. You don't. That's a dishonorable play by the Saints. But I'm fine with running up the score, but we're not going to do it on a fake kneel down. We don't do that. We don't do that here. But yeah, that's I think one of those things will probably happen, Jason. One of the things you mentioned. Well, I don't know which one. We're definitely going to see Justin Fields doing the Felipe Franks snap. Like he's going to do like some Felipe Franks, Justin Fields type stuff. Like this is going to happen. Like I was surprised Justin Fields wasn't playing tight end when I heard he wasn't starting at quarterback. So if Justin Fields takes a snap as a tight end, just at me, because don't say I didn't warn you. Arthur Smith can't help himself. Okay. He just needs that in his offense. But there's a ton of expectations for this Falcons team. We all feel it. We're making these expectations as media members. But like, I'm curious, realistically, like what are your expectations, Tre'Shon, for this team? Are you thinking that like if they don't get double-digit wins, if they don't make the playoffs, like what are you really expecting now that it comes to it for this Falcons team in 2024?
Yeah. So I am expecting them to basically get 10 wins, get into the playoffs. If it's 9 wins and they get into the playoffs, so be it. But really looking for them to kind of just first and foremost take a little bit of control of the division. Once again, the NFC South is wide open and extremely opportunistic. And if we can take care of the division, as we've seen everybody else do or I guess just say Tampa Bay do for the past 3 years.
Everyone except everyone except the Panthers. Yeah.
8 wins.
Yeah.
And so I think for them, 10 wins is achievable. I think it's going to be a rocky start, though.
Yeah.
I'm hyped for the Steelers game, and then after that, those next 3 games are just going to be, quite the challenge. So I'm really expecting them to maybe, not get off to the greatest start, but that schedule after the bye, and then just being in the NFC South, I really think that, there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to muster up enough wins to get into the playoffs this year. and, finally get back to playing some winning football. That's really all I want. I don't need a Super Bowl this year. That's, I don't even need a playoff win. Just get there, man. Like, just get there, beat some good teams, and carry it forward to 2025, and I'm good. And then that's when the real expectations will set in. But, until we get there, we got to see, and be able to take the small steps first and just be able to be considered a winning team.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I would like a playoff win, just for the record.
Yeah, I would love one. I mean, I'm not saying I won't.
I would like one. No, I would definitely like that. But yeah, Dave, what do you think? What sort of you landing on now as we sort of come to it here at the start of the season? What are your expectations for this team?
Yeah, I'm right in the same neighborhood as Tre'Shon with about 10 wins. I have talked myself into, for my season prediction, spoiler, a playoff win. We'll see if that actually happens. But I think my brain has sort of gone 180 from where it was in 2016 and 2017, where I just kept talking myself into lesser and lesser squads and saying, well, they can overcome this by doing this. There's still enough talent here. Julio's Julio. And obviously there were diminishing returns, and gradually over the last 6 years of losing football, I've been talking myself into the other part of it, which is, okay, what's going to go wrong? Like what could possibly go wrong here? But I think I've turned this over in my head enough over the past 6 months that I look at this team as being a little too talented to be, 7-10 again or whatever, be mediocre. I do think that I trust Raheem Morris. I like that hire a lot. I trust the coaching staff they built. I trust the talent on hand more than I trust the Falcons being the Falcons at the end of the day. So I do think that something like 10 wins after a rough start, because, the Eagles and the Chiefs, that's not easy. It is a perfectly reasonable thing. And if it's a little bit slow to get going, ultimately, I think what they've put together here is good enough to get them back to the playoffs. And, for the NFC South, whatever the expectations are, no matter how low they are for, the Saints in particular, but to a lesser extent, the Panthers and the Buccaneers, my expectations are probably lower. So that does help a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think you combine various things with the Saints, I think, are not going to be able to maintain their mediocrity any longer. I think this is the year where they kind of fall apart. The Panthers take a step forward, but that probably means 6 wins, we're not like a step forward for them is 6 wins. And the Bucks, the Bucks are fine. The Bucks are a fine team, but there's just nothing sexy about that team. I mean, Mike Evans, always sexy. Love Mike Evans. Chris Godwin, hopefully he's healthy. But there's just, that team is just kind of solid. They don't really, I mean, last year was a golden opportunity for them to sort of dominate the NFC South, and they barely scraped by. The Falcons should have beat the crap out of them twice. So the Falcons played literally the worst possible game against them in their win, and they still won. And then the Falcons should have beat them again, but they did not. So it's there's really not too much to fear from this division. The schedule, especially in the back half, is just, we could go the last 6 or 7 games without playing a team with a winning record, and which is kind of striking. So I think there's an opportunity. I know Tre'Shon mentioned it. This opening month is pretty brutal, and the Falcons have only beaten the Steelers twice in history. So I think they got an excellent chance to get their 3rd win this week. Part of the reason for that is that the Steelers have almost always been really good, and the Falcons have, until recently, always been pretty bad. So that's a large reason why they've beaten them so few times. But this is a different. Those historical stats have no bearing on anything. I mean, they're interesting to talk about, but what the Falcons did 4 years ago against Pittsburgh has no actual statistical relevance to what they will do this week. It's just kind of a fun thing to talk about. But they got to win this game. They got to beat Pittsburgh this week. They have to. If they don't win this game, the floodgates of pessimism will just fly open, because you're probably not going to beat the Eagles in Philly or Patrick Mahomes ever. So and that's not even an insult. So few teams beat Patrick Mahomes, period. That I mean, you got a chance. It's early in the season when the Chiefs have been a little shakier, and it's in Atlanta. Maybe you got some good home field advantage, what have you, but like, you should expect to lose those 2 games. So if you don't beat the Steelers, you're going into that Saints game at 0-3 with a desperate need to win that game. If you beat the Steelers, you feel fine. Like, if you beat the Steelers, it's all good. It's all good going into that Saints game. And if you steal one of those games against the Eagles or the Chiefs, then you're flying. You're like, oh my God, this team is amazing. If you sweep them all, then everyone's like, oh, Super Bowl bound, let's go. We beat 2 of the best teams. That's not going to happen, but like, we can dream, we can get there. But like, the first thing you got to do is beat the damn Steelers. I'm sorry. Like, this Steelers team is not that good. Like, Mike Tomlin's a great coach. It's still a good defense, but you have to be able to shut down this offense. Like, if this defense can't hold this Steelers offense to under 20, then like, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it this year. It's not going to cut it against any really good teams. You got to be able to keep this team down enough for your offense to get ahead. And like, I expect this offense to be shakier early. I think we all do. I mean, it's a new quarterback, new system, new all this stuff. But I think they got to get this game. They got to get this dub. And if they do, I think they'll be on the right track. And if they don't, well, we're going to have to confront, existential dread again with this franchise. But ultimately, they've got a great chance to clean up late in the season. I still think they'll get to double-digit wins. I think if they don't get to double-digit wins and win this division, it's a failure. So they need to have a success for a change. That would be nice. So that's my expectations. Double-digit wins, win the division, and we'll go from there. I think they should win a playoff game. But again, it's like, we don't know who they're playing. So like, if they go up against, I think I said this on last week's show, it's like, if they go up against like the 49ers in the first round, because the 49ers had some injuries and ended up being like the 5th seed or something, then it's like, okay, well, that's not so bad. Like, if you lose to the Steelers, who just happen to have a bad record because of some crazy stuff, that's not necessarily that bad. Now, if you lose to like the Bucks in the wild card round or like the 7 seed or something, then yeah, you should be embarrassed. But it depends. Like, we got a ways to go before we start maligning this team for possibly losing in the playoffs. Like, let's just get there first, win the division, and then we can talk about that. But yeah, any final takes from you guys? And we got just a couple of questions to get to. But yeah, anything else, Tre'Shon, you want to touch on before we sign off?
No, nothing from me. Yeah, feel just ready to see it, man. At this point, it's just one of those things where it's like both of you guys have mentioned. It's like we haven't seen the real offense. We've seen pieces of the defense and guys who will start, but we really haven't even seen. We didn't even see Hughes or Phillips suit up. So it's just one of those things where just ready to see it in action.
Mm-hmm. It's time for the rubber to meet the road here. And Dave, anything else you want to add?
No, just enjoy the next couple days when like the possibilities seem endless before actual football happens and either confirms that or destroys it instantly. So it's a nice reprieve one way or another.
Yes, week 1 is the week for overreaction. So I'm either gonna, like, if they just like curb stomp the Steelers, we're gonna just be like, oh, this team's going to the Super Bowl, get out of the way, and if they lose to the Steelers, it's gonna be like, well, this team sucks, let's phone it in for the rest of the year. But ultimately, this game probably doesn't matter. It's an out of conference game. It in terms of like meaningfulness, this is one of the least meaningful games on the schedule. But it matters because it's week 1, and we just need to beat Arthur Smith. Okay, we need to beat Arthur Smith. All right, we cannot let this man come into Atlanta and beat us. That's not an option. We don't take prisoners. We don't allow that to happen. We need to get this done. So I hope that they will do so. Before we sign off, please like, subscribe, everybody. Before we sign off, got a couple more questions. We got George says, okay, I've got an idea. What about Jalen Mayfield for the 53rd roster spot? Don't tell Aaron Freeman or Oddnot. He says also, I've got this one as Atlanta 27, Pittsburgh with just 9. I think Bijan gets to 2 touchdowns, and Russ cooks like a 3-year-old with a play school kitchen set. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a scenario where like the Pittsburgh offensive line is bad enough that offense just like collapses. I still think Pittsburgh's going to get to double-digit points, but I think Atlanta's going to get in the 20s. So as long as the Falcons can get more points than the Steelers, it's typically how you win football games. So I think we'll be okay. Jason Kane says, I bet Pat McAfee won't be having Arthur Smith on his show anymore. Those appearances were very weird last year. Also, I would not be shocked to see Arthur Smith using Justin Fields in the Wildcat and sending Russell Wilson out to receiver. I mean, Jason, yeah. I think we're going to see some Felipe Franks type stuff with Justin Fields. And it never worked in Atlanta. So I'll just put that out there. But we got one last one from George. He says, I swore after Super Bowl 51 that I'd never go back to a Super Bowl. Worst $8,000 I ever spent. Woo! Yeah, that I'd be very upset with that. He says, but if we do make it this year, I'm going. May even raffle off a ticket on the show. All right, let's do it. This team can win it all. Playoffs is about matchups, and we can be a tough out if healthy. Yeah, I mean, the playoffs, look, once you make the dance, anything's possible. And the matchups do matter a lot. So depending on the Falcons seeding, they could either have a very, very tough path or a easier path. But the NFC is not like the AFC. I think we've seen that pretty much every NFC East team is vulnerable in some way. Obviously, San Francisco is kind of going to be a tough out no matter what, and the Lions look really good. But other than that, I mean, I think, the Packers, not that scary in my opinion. I mean, I think that's a team on the come up, but it's like, they're beatable. The Falcons beat them, for God's sake. The last year's Falcons beat them. They can't be that good, right? So I think the NFC is a lot more easy to navigate than the AFC. And I will forever be grateful for that, that we don't have to go through that gauntlet to make the playoffs. You just have to catch Kyle Shanahan on an off day, and that's all it takes. So, easier said than done, but it's possible. So, yeah. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Kevin Knight at Falcoholic. Kevin, want to thank my guests. First of all, Tre'Shon Diaz. He's at Tre'Shon on the Twitter X. Tre'Shon, anything you're working on you want to let the people know about?
No, just working on more things for the Falcoholic and working on stuff over at the Sporting News as well. Been super happy to be a part of the team and, just looking forward to putting out more stuff for you guys as the season goes on.
Yeah, and check out Tre'Shon's article on SB Nation, by the way, doing the NFC South preview. I have not finished it yet. I read like the first two previews and it looked like a banger. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the banger label on it. So you guys have to go check it out. But thanks for that great work, Tre'Shon. We've loved having you so far. Of course, with us, the Falcoholic himself. He's Dave Choate. Dave, anything you'd like to plug before we sign off tonight?
No, just doing the season run-up stuff. We're doing predictions for the season ahead. We have predictions, obviously, for the game, and I've been trying to break down what the Falcons need to do to make the playoffs in a way that doesn't boil down to defense good, offense good. So hopefully I did an okay job at that, but you can tell me.
Okay, I'll read that one too and get back to you on the banger watch on that
Thanks,
one.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Score more points than your opponent. Okay, that sounds pretty simple. Yeah, I think we can handle that.
I mean, I thought it was pretty insightful. So
I thought so too. Yeah, that's. I wonder why more teams don't do that. I don't get that. That seems really, really straightforward. But
it's a head scratcher.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, I can't figure this one out. But thanks so much for tuning into the Falcoholic Live, guys. Like, subscribe, leave that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. If you want to support the show, you can check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live. Or if you're more of a video enjoyer, we have channel memberships. If you want to subscribe there, get early access to the recorded shows. So check that out. We'll be back on Friday with the game preview show with the aforementioned Mark Bergen from Believe in Steelers. He'll be on helping to break down that game. And then we'll be live after Falcons Steelers for our first post-game show of the year with Alan Stirk. So keep that one in mind. Make sure to join us there to either rage or celebrate. There's a lot of back and forth on that last year. Hopefully more celebrating this year, but you guys do love to come on and rage on the post-game show. That's what we're here for. So thanks again for joining us, folks. We will see you next time on the show.